you start getting the responses that you got to the Texas decision, where all of a sudden people started to say, well, maybe we need to band together. A bunch of states need to, but right? Alan West, the chairman of Texas Republican Party, starts saying, well, maybe a bunch of states need to join Texas and we'll form our own union. So you start getting the secessionist talk. Now, he backed away from it, but even Rush Limbaugh was talking about this. And that's a logical step. If 50% of people feel like they've been excommunicated from the public square, where do they go? Okay, so they end up looking inward. And that's what we're seeing throughout the world. Since 1991, 35 new nations have been added to the world map. Secessionism in many respects is par for the course today. So we have to be really careful to the extent to which the left wants to implement a policy like that. For all I know, they could care less. They have no problem tearing the nation apart. We'll have to see.
Before we begin, let's give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video, and that's the Backup Solar Bank. Now, in the midst of this whole emergency situation we found ourselves in, one of the best things that you can invest in for your protection when the lights go out is what's called a solar power bank. It's a backup power bank that's powered by the sun. It allows you to charge up to 2 devices at once, and you'll never, ever have to waste money on batteries again. Now, supply is limited, and this is the very last chance to get yours at a 20% discount before they sell out. So don't wait. Click on the link below right now and give you and your family the gift of power anywhere in the world. Click on the link below, or you can visit their website at backupsolarbank.com. That's backupsolarbank.com. You'll be glad that you did.
Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and very timely to have back with us today Dr. Steve Turley. He is an author, a speaker, and the host of the Turley Talks podcast. And I so appreciate his point of view. You can go to turleytalks.com. That's Turley, talks.com. And check out his podcast there. He does an excellent job. Dr. Turley, good to see you, friend. How are you?
Oh, I'm well, Perry. Merry Christmas to you and yours, and a Happy New Year. We'll get that all in before we start, right?
Yeah, well, let's get 2020 into the books, okay?
That's right. That's right.
Good to see you. Yeah, Merry Christmas to you and yours as well. Well, listen, what happened with the Texas case from your point of view? Why the Supreme Court didn't even sniff it?
Yes, I like how you put it there. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, most would argue, I think Alan Dershowitz was right on this, the Harvard prof. That was a clear signal that they don't want to touch this thing. Roberts has cold feet about getting involved in any kind of election controversy, which is ironic, because if I recall, he was one of the lawyers for Bush v. Gore on behalf of Bush back in 2000. But they're just signaling you in the legislatures, you're going to have to work this out, which ironically can be to our advantage, because you're starting to see in Georgia, you're starting to see in Arizona in particular with Representative Fincham, starting to see in Wisconsin and Michigan, legislatures beginning to step up and say, you know what, there was enough evidence here, whether we're looking at, suitcase gate, or we look at the improprieties among non-legislative election officials, where we look at the glitches in Dominion, particularly in Antrim County in Michigan. There's enough here to call into question the integrity of this election. And we're going to invoke Article 2's powers that they give us to seat our own electors, which happened in 1960, which is pretty interesting. We do have some precedent for that. We're going to seat our own electors. And of course, Biden is not going to just simply seat his own electors. So this will eventually get to the Supreme Court. And if they rule the way they did in the Texas case, saying, hey, you legislatures work it out, then either they flip the electors to Trump and he gets over 270. All you need is 3 of the 6 contested states. Or they simply decertify and it gets thrown into the House, where every state gets 1 vote via a delegation. And there are 30 starting in January, 30 Republican states to 20 Democrat states. So Trump wins re-election rather easily. So ironically, I would have loved to have seen them taking up this case, but ironically, it could be working in our favor, and that they just say, all right, you Republican legislatures, you work this out.
Okay, but over the weekend, Steve, excuse me, Dr. Turley, the president's team filed another case before the Supreme Court on Pennsylvania, not based on the outcome, but of the unconstitutional way that the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania and the Secretary of State and the governor overruled the legislature. So it's a legislative argument, not a voting argument. Do you think they can ignore that one?
Exactly. I don't know. I don't see how they can. Again, all the twofold strategy, the two flanks in the battle here is legislative and legal. And so legislative is putting pressure on the House of Representatives or the Senates, the respective states, to step up, call special sessions, rectify whatever injustices happen on November 3rd, that kind of thing. On the legal side of things, they're trying to give those legislatures the cover or the impetus to do that, because if the Supreme Court rules, for example, in favor of the Trump team or Sean Parnell and Mike Kelly's case, I believe, still has been docketed in Supreme Court as well. It's a very similar case, suing based on improprieties among non-legislative election officials. In this case, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, which is radical, by the way. They vote for their Supreme Court justices, and they have 4 hard leftists on there out of 7. It's really a tragedy. Does not represent the citizens of Pennsylvania, at least particularly Western Pennsylvania. But they want to push this over the Supreme Court, get the Supreme Court at least to rule on the unconstitutionality, which was obvious. Alito has already forecasted that he's going to rule that way in a 4-page. Wasn't so much a decision, I guess, a briefing that required all votes cast after 8 p.m. on November 3rd to be separated from the vote total in Pennsylvania. And that's because, according to Act 77, the Pennsylvania legislature put a time limit of when the ballots needed to be in, including, mailed-in ballots, and it had to be 8 p.m. on Election Day, Tuesday. And the Supreme Court basically came in, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court came in and changed the law. They just, it was classic legislating from the bench and said, no, they can do it 3 days later, and it doesn't have to be this, and it doesn't have to be that. And Alito has said that was clear legislation from the bench. We're a federalist court now, 5-vote block majority is pretty federalist. We're not allowing anything like that to happen anymore. So it seems they got to rule on it. Now, the question is what to do about it, and I think they're going to punt that back to Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And all you need is one state to fall in many ways, to a ruling like that against improprieties, and I think the rest will fall as well, because you'll have sort of your silver bullet there, and you have an excuse. Well, Pennsylvania's doing it, and we're much worse, like Maricopa County in Arizona, 4.5 million voters. So I think it's messy, but I think they're going to have to rule on it some way. They're certainly not going to be able to say the president has no standing. They're not going to be able to say anything like that. They can't appeal to that technicality. So it'll be interesting to see, and we should know, obviously, in the next 10 days or so.
Because what's interesting about all this is that the Supreme Court could have at least listened to the evidence. They could have at least done that. And then they had the perfect way out of this by saying, this is a state legislature's deal. We are requiring the state legislatures to go into special session and settle this problem. But when they just ignored the whole thing, that's a little strange and, quite frankly, very disappointing, which leaves a shadow over to whether or not the filing of yesterday in Pennsylvania, whether or not it's going to be seen or heard anyway. Because we have the same crises going on here in Oregon, but a little bit different twist to it. The Supreme Court has took 2 bills and cafeteriaed them together and said to the governor, yes, you can extend your emergency powers another 60 days, when the Constitution clearly says that authority has to come from the legislature. And she's done it now 3 times. So what bothers me about this, when Amy Coney Barrett was going through her confirmation process, if you remember, there was a half a day where they argued the precedence of law. And the concern that I have is if these things go unchallenged, they become the precedents. And I'm wondering if that's the left's new tricky tool.
Yeah, that's great. Probably, absolutely, I would see that, no question. Absolutely. And you also, you are seeing, I think, in many respects, sort of the politicization of the Supreme Court from the vantage point of half the voting population, at least, feeling like they're being shut out of the public square. It's again, like you said, it was perfect. It's not that they listened and decided against us. It's that they refuse to listen. and that's what we get in our media 24/7, mainstream media. It's what makes alt media so important today, is that at least half the voting population feels like they've been, in effect, excommunicated from having any kind of any kind of opportunity of just expressing their concerns and their sentiments in the public square without being ridiculed and mocked and heckled. And you start doing that, you start getting the responses that you got to the Texas Texas decision, where all of a sudden people started to say, well, maybe we need to band together. A bunch of states need to, right? Alan West, the chairman of Texas Republican Party, starts saying, well, maybe a bunch of states need to join Texas and we'll form our own union. So you start getting the secessionist talk. Now, he backed away from it, but even Rush Limbaugh was talking about this. And that's a logical step. If 50% of people feel like they've been excommunicated from the public square, where do they go? Okay, so they end up looking inward. And that's what we're seeing throughout the world. Since 1991, 35 new nations have been added to the world map. Secessionism, in many respects, is par for the course today. So we have to be really careful to the extent to which the left wants to implement a policy like that. For all I know, they could care less. They have no problem tearing the nation apart. We'll have to see.
Okay, I understand that, and you hear these. I read the articles like you, and you see these things that Texas is, pretty ticked off about what's happened here, and possibly could go down this road of succession. But here's the deal: they got another opportunity to really prove their standing, and that's January 6th. Yeah. And I'm wondering if a Ted Cruz lines up with somebody from the House of Representatives out of the state of Texas. And I mean, it only takes one senator and one rep, and this thing goes into conference. And it's going to be the real test of true Republicans coming up January 6th. This is going to be the test of all tests of conservatism as to whether or not they're going to obey Mitch McConnell or obey their state. What's your take?
Yeah, you said it here. Are you with the Democrats or are you with the deplorables? That's what people want to see. This is what's the tension behind the day before that, January 5th, and the Loeffler and Perdue runoff in Georgia. Although I did see, as of this morning, Trafalgar shows that they're kind of running away with it, which I'm glad about. But that's only after, particularly Loeffler, stood up and said, "Yeah, I think I'll vote to challenge the January 6th Electoral College in Washington, D.C. So she's actually farther ahead of her opponent by 7 points than Perdue is, who's been wishy-washy, Mittens, McConnell-like, So I think you're absolutely correct. I think we're already hearing Mo Brooks of Alabama saying he is definitely going to file a petition of objection. Matt Gaetz of Florida has also said in the House of Representatives. And then we have heard rumblings from Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Josh Hawley in Missouri, Rand Paul, Kentucky, and then certainly Ted Cruz, who was in Georgia over the weekend, saying that anybody who was involved with any kind of election improprieties or illegalities needs to be jailed. So the rhetoric is getting ratcheted up, and it sounds like the pressure the deplorables are putting on our Republican Party is bearing fruit. We have to remember, and I agree with you, the whole notion of secession, I do think, misses the point that it is our Republican Party now. The deplorables own it. We are the base. We gave them 2 elections in a row of massive turnout, unlike anything Republicans have seen since 1984. And what the Republican establishment, the bougie rhino Republican, what they risk doing is alienating 95% of their base where only 5% of Republicans didn't vote for Trump in 2020. So what was that? That's 7 points higher than in 2016, where he got 88%. So if they're going for the mittens, the Romney Republican 5%, it's not just going to be a disaster, but I think in the end, electorally, but I think at the end, either you see a third party emerge that turns the Republicans into Whigs. Remember, Nigel Farage in England was able to start a third party and decimate the Conservatives, the Tories, in 6 weeks. They set up a new party for their European Parliament elections back in May of 2019 and utterly decimated the Tories in that 1 out of every 3 Brits voted for a party, the Brexit party, that was just 6 weeks old. We have the base to do that, or we have to primary all these guys and finally rid ourselves once and for all of these rhino Republicans. Either way, I definitely think they're going to have to step up on January 6th to show they're with the deplorables and not with the Democrats.
Okay, just to make one point clear before we take a break, a state has to have a representative and a U.S. senator. I mean, one U.S. senator can't represent multiple states. He has to represent his state with a representative, correct?
Got it.
Okay. Let me take a quick break. Anyway, Dr. Steve Turley is with us. You can go to Turley Talks. That's where you can get his podcast, TURLEY Talks.com. There's the picture of the landing page. He's got some great interviews. I envy him. Sometimes, maybe, kind of, sort of. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Always an honor to have with us Dr. Steve Turley. He's an author, a speaker, and the host of the Turley Talks podcast. Check it out at turleytalks.com. Got some great guests, a lot of great information there. turleytalks.com. All right, Dr. Turley, does the president have the power to name a special counsel outside of the attorney general?
I believe he does. I believe the way, as I understand it, the attorney general is an executive office. And so any office that is executive draws its power from the president, the chief executive. So absolutely, as I understand it, he does. And I think he should, absolutely, for a special counsel for not just the election here, what's going on, but the special counsel for the whole Hunter Biden fiascos. We find out that the FBI's and Justice Department were sitting on that information for 1.5 years and not making anything known about that. We would never have had an impeachment trial if we knew what was going on there. So absolutely, the swamp never disappoints. And
yeah.
So I think,
okay.
I do think he does have that power and should invoke it. Yeah.
All right. The second part of that question is, then let's just assume for a moment, only for a moment, that Biden gets into the White House. Does he have the power to disenfranchise that special counsel?
So as I understand it, if they're put into, like with John Durham recently, who's been looking into the whole Russian collusion fiasco, if they are given special prosecutor status, they're not allowed to touch him, as I understand. I guess he could. He has the authority to fire, but that would unleash a firestorm on Capitol Hill that he would not want to deal with. So as I understand, that was one of the reasons why John Durham was put into official special prosecutor, again, unannounced. It was something we found out months later, so that he can continue his investigation into a possible Biden term.
Okay, your opinion. What's happened to Attorney General Barr, and why hasn't the Durham report come out on the Russia collusion? What's happened there? Something fell through the cracks.
Oh my, I'm still not, there was a time I was giving him the benefit of the doubt, in that he, as the head of the Justice Department, he deals with criminal law as opposed to civic law. So when he said that there was not enough evidence for any kind of prosecution, he's thinking in terms of criminality and jail time as opposed to serious civic violations and improprieties and the like. I went with that at first. And then I find out he's sitting on all this information, and I just don't know. I don't know. Other than my inclination is to just say the swamp fumes get inhaled deeply by all kinds. It really is a political class. We have to understand that. So Scott Rasmussen and Doug Schoen wrote that book, Mad as Hell, on the Tea Party back in 2010. And these are pollsters. And what they found back then is that a new political animosity was rising that transcended partisan animosities, Republican versus Democrat, or ideological animosities, conservative versus liberal. And what was the new animosity that was surfacing, that was uniting actually Republicans and Democrats, was this new animosity towards the political class versus the people, or the rulers versus the ruled. And it just becomes increasing, and this is going on in Europe as well, it just becomes increasingly apparent that they live by their own rules, their own standards. They pass laws on us and then exempt themselves from it. They govern in accordance with their own benefit, which is so often at the expense of the benefit that people they claim to represent. So the only sense you can make of what's going on in Washington, D.C., particularly with bars, is it's not because he wanted to avoid politics. He certainly wasn't afraid of doing that prior to this. It's not because of this or because of that. It's in the end, it's because, well, the political class rules in accordance with what it considers to be advantageous for themselves.
Yeah.
So whatever reasoning he has, I think that reasoning is found in this divide between the people versus the political class. And it's just fueling the populist revolt. The populist revolt's getting, look at what's going on in Georgia. I mean, Georgians are absolutely furious at the Republican, their governor and their senators and House of Reps. They're just absolutely furious that no special session of the legislature has been called. 60% of Georgians want it, and yet it falls once again on deaf ears. That's creating this populist revolt like nothing before.
With all that in mind, what I'm sensing here is just a sense, and you can add to it, but it appears to me that both parties are now heading for a major split. The Democrats as well. You got the AOCs that now are not going to get seated on these committees that they want, and the margin in the House is only 4 votes. Nancy Pelosi's got problems, and the DNC is going to split down the middle. You got January 6th coming up on the Republican side of things, which is going to split the rhinos from the conservatives and everybody else, the Trump haters and all that. At the end of the day, on January 7th, we may have a divided electorate in this country unlike anything we've ever seen before. The left will go totally social. The right could go major conservative, and this mushy middle could really lose its way for a while. Do you think that's possible, or am I just drinking too much coffee?
Well, you enjoy your coffee. I love my coffee too. People will say that to me. They'll say I don't drink coffee, and I just throw my bra and say, "Are you a Christian?" But anyway, my bad theology there. But yeah, I think you're on to a period. That's what's happened in Europe. Okay, so Europe's about 10 years ahead of us on this. What's happened in Europe is the center left and the center right, the old kind of globalist duopoly that we all came to know and love, the neocons and the neolibs, they basically collapsed. In 2017, there were 913 municipal elections throughout Europe. The center left won only 6% of them. I mean, this was a total collapse. And so what's happened, interestingly, is the right has moved to the nationalist populist right, so no more kind of the neocon sort of thing. It's much more nation, culture, custom, tradition that's governing the Pat Buchanification, as it were, if I could coin a phrase there, of the right.
Okay.
And then the left has moved into the far left socialist realm. Die Linke of Germany would be a perfect example. They're basically an Eastern European holdover from the communist days. So what we're finding is that that's the pattern. The pattern is they're moving farther to the right and you're moving farther to the left because the center is imploding. The Mitt Romney said there's no future for a Mitt Romney center, and there's no future for Nancy Pelosi, neo-lib center there, or Joe Biden for that matter. You got it. The Antifa BLM wing is taking over. It's just going to take a generation or so. But here's the neat part. The pattern in Europe is the more the left embraces the far left, the more it turns off the vast majority of the population that's turning more to identity, national identity, culture, custom, tradition. So they're going to the center right. So as of this year, the center-left coalitions only have about 3 nations in the whole of Europe. Europe, by and large, has become a center-right continent, so much so in Hungary, for example, and in Poland, you have 60 to 70% of the population voting for the nationalist populist right. So the more left they get, the pattern in Europe is the more they alienate the majority of the population and they turn to the center right.
You never hear that on the news, but you certainly see it in reality. That's a great observation. Okay, so another illustration of that, look at this huge response to recall Governor Newsom. I mean, this thing is on the move. I mean, let's remember now, California impeached Governor Davis.
Yeah.
And Newsom, I mean, the only out for Newsom is he could appoint himself to take Kamala Harris's seat, which would be kind of like a stick in your eye, so to speak. But at the end of the day, if she isn't seated as vice president and they oust him, that tells me California has had enough. And when you got Oracle leaving, you got Tesla leaving, and the list goes on and on and on. I mean, California is a mess.
Yeah. Elon Musk is gone. Joe Rogan is gone. Ben Shapiro just left for Tennessee, Nashville. So absolutely, I understand California is poised to turn red. Now it will be a populist red. That's the key. It's not an ideological red or anything like that. It's a populist red. The people have had it with their political class that passes these double standard, lockdown measures on everybody in the state, whereas they go and party unmasked inside with, with as many people as they want. We're seeing it all over the place, and they've had it. They've absolutely had it. So what unseated Gray back at, what was it now? 20 years ago or so, before Arnold Schwarzenegger decimated the Republican Party, because he transfigured into the weirdest thing when he was governor. He's this hulk of a man who transfigured into Greta Thunberg. It was the oddest thing I think I've ever seen. This hulk of a man turned into a 15-year-old Swedish girl. It was very bizarre. He became as green could get. And alienated again, like Mittens Romney, he alienated 95% of his Republican base. If you can, and I think they're getting it, if you could put together some leaders, Republican leaders, who make it a thoroughgoing populist party, it's not ideology, it's the people versus the corrupt political class, California will turn red. They're ready to go. They're ready to tip over. And man, if California goes,
yeah, we'll see.
We're gonna have a lot of fun over the next few years. That's for sure.
Well, this is interesting times. Interesting times. How are you praying lately for the country?
Oh, I pray. There's a Gateway pundit actually had a prayer from a I kid you not, it was a Catholic exorcist. And it is a prayer that is used during an exorcism to protect a person from spiritual attack. And I've been praying that a lot and it was recommended. I think it was Jim Hoff, or one of the editors there, said, this is such a powerful prayer. Let's all be lifting this up on a daily basis. So I've been doing that, as well as in some prayer books, just praying for our civil magistrates, asking God to bless our president and our vice president, both of them, to protect them from nefarious forces, and to lead them and to guide them and our nation into truth. All we want in the end are the lies to be exposed. If they're exposed and President Trump still lost, amen. We're fine with that. We can move on. We certainly don't think that's the case, but we can move on. What we cannot deal with is the absolute assertion that your concerns, the concerns of 74 million people, will not be listened to. We're going to call you names. We're going to ridicule you. We're going to mock you. And until you bend your knee to the way we understand reality on the liberal left, you're excommunicated. No, we're not buying that. So we're turning to the Lord, and we're asking him to intervene in a way that shows his glory in ways we can't even imagine.
Thank you, my friend. Merry Christmas to you and yours. Look forward to many visits this coming next year. We got a lot to talk about. And keep up the good work. Your website's fantastic. Thanks for what you do. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, check it out, turleytalks.com. That's where you can check out his podcast as well, TURLEY talks.com. Thanks, brother. God bless you. Have a good Christmas.
God bless you, Perry. Merry Christmas.